expect just how much it spoke of his glory and his majesty and his beauty. So I didn't expect all those things. I did expect we have a good time, and I also expected that, we're going to get along great because you know what? We're a Christian family, and we love each other. What could go wrong? It's going to be great. And it was, but there were some unexpected things there too. And I didn't expect, though, to see just how much I need God myself. I didn't expect some of the mechanical problems that we encountered, or different parks closing, or things that we planned months in advance falling apart to some degree. And I didn't expect a lot of those things. But here's what I saw, is that through all those unexpected things, God revealed his faithfulness. I'm going to share some things I learned on sabbatical. They're not new things. But you know what? So often in life, the lessons that God has for us aren't new necessarily, but he shows them to us in new ways. And so I heard some things that I needed to learn. I still need to learn. I'm going to suspect that I'm going to need to learn these things the rest of my life. The most important thing I learned, and what I hope you take away, if you just take away one thing today, is that in the midst of our plans, the unexpected, God is faithful. In the midst of our plans, and by the way, our plans are not always what he has planned. In the midst of our plans, in the midst of all the unexpected of life, God is faithful. That was my big takeaway. I know it sounds kind of simple, but that's my big takeaway. In the midst of all my plans, in the midst of all the unexpected, in the midst of so many different things, God demonstrated his faithfulness in so many different ways. And so I'm going to share some things about how God demonstrated his faithfulness, some of the things I learned about how God's faithful, even if all of our plans don't go the way we want. In the midst of unexpected, God's faithful, even when the unexpected is challenging. And you know what? Even a wonderful time away can be really challenging, especially when you come to it with expectations that can't really ever be met to some degree. Will a time away, is that what brings us true refreshment? Well, no. God does. Does a time away, does a vacation, does a sabbatical, does whatever, does that bring joy? Does having your dreams come true, does that bring joy? No, but God brings joy. He brings fulfillment. He brings hope. In the midst of all the unexpected, even when things are challenging, God's faithful. There's a verse that I'd like to quote a lot. I'm a little more careful to quoting it now, but I like to quote it a lot. It's in Proverbs 16:9. I like the way the NIV puts it. It says, in his heart, a man plans his course. And so that's true. In his heart, our desires. We plan out our ways. We plan out our course. And there's a really important but right after that. But the Lord determines his steps. We planned out our course along the way, but we realized, all along the way, God had been planning out our steps. And that's true for all of us in all of life. We plan out our course, and there are unexpected things, there are unexplained things, there are difficulties and frustrations and challenges in life. We plan out our ways, and we're really confident. We're looking forward to those plans, whether that plan might be, hey, you're in high school, and you are planning for a career. It might not turn out the way you think. I had aspirations of doing different things than being a pastor. And I did those different things for a while, but you know what? God directed my steps. And no matter what you're doing now, maybe you have just lost your job and it's not going like how you planned. God's directing your path. You can be confident he's faithful even when things don't go the way you want. Maybe you planned to have children and you struggle with infertility. You can trust that God is still faithful, that his plans, he's still directing your paths. Maybe you wanted to get married and you're not. Maybe you were married and you've been divorced. Maybe you've had all kinds of things happen. You can trust that although we plan out our ways, God directs our path. And there's hope and confidence in that for the believer. I wanted things to be a certain way. I planned out as much detail as I could, but you know what? Not everything went like I planned. And that was good. In the moment, sometimes it didn't feel so good, but it was good. And God was one who directs and determines our paths. And it's an interesting experience to be asked to go away. When Aaron and Doug and Chris and Dan, when they asked, hey, would you go away on sabbatical? I'm like, well, what? Like, what? You trying to get rid of me? Like, what's going on? I'm fine. I love the ideas hypothetically of a sabbatical, but then actually taking one, there was a little bit of trepidation of that. I felt a little guilt going away. Not only that, it's like, well, how's the church going to do? And all those things are going to go through your head. And thankfully, after I confirmed nothing was really wrong, God worked to help me do what I should have done a long time ago. Now, our church's manual says, every 7 years we'll take sabbatical. Well, I've been here 12 years, been pastoring for 20 years, and this was the first time I took a break, and it was a God-provided time to step away from responsibilities and have God teach me things. And I'm glad God did. He showed me his faithfulness from start to finish to our family, and I think also to this church family as well. And so I'm going to share with you 7 different things. I'm not going to be terribly long, but 7 different things that I learned on sabbatical, and I trust to be a source of encouragement to you. The first thing I wanted to share with you is that God is faithful to provide and care for us. God's faithful to provide and care for us. Maybe you're wondering about God's faithfulness for you. I hope that you're encouraged to hear how God has faithfully provided and cared for us, that you'll see that God does provide and care for his children, and you begin to recognize how he provides, how he cares. Because sometimes they're subtle. Sometimes they're subtle. There's a passage in 1 Peter 5:7 says, cast all your anxiety on him. Cast all your worries, all your anxiety, your fears on him. Because why? Because he cares for you. That verse is even more real to us after we went away for a time, that he has cared for us and he's cared for this church. God is faithful to provide and care for us. The first time when somebody suggested we take a cross-country RV trip, I thought, you're nuts. I'm never taking a trip in an RV. Across country, I hate driving. Are you kidding? That sounds like something crazy. And then so many people kept suggesting, I thought, well, maybe I should look into it. And then we got to the place where we're convinced that, this is what God has for us. And so, maybe we'll buy an RV and then we'll plan to sell it when we get back because, we can't afford to buy a used RV just outright, but maybe we can buy it and we'll take a couple $1,000 loss or whatever it is and we'll sell it. And so we went to do that and we bought an RV. It was a great experience. It broke down the first day after we bought it. It was wonderful. On the way home, we were driving home from North Carolina, way away, and after we passed, I think Boone, and we're going somewhere between Boone and Blowing Rock in the Appalachian Mountains. If you ever driven the Appalachian Mountains, they're narrow roads through the Appalachian Mountains, and there's no streetlights. It's dark. They're windy. There's some places where things drop off, and so I'm driving this RV that we bought, and the dash lights go out, so I can't see anything. I'm like, no big deal. Probably just a fuse. Everything's still fine. About 5 minutes later, here's a little yeet. And the engine, I'm like, Abby, shine a flashlight over here on the dash. See what's going on. What's that little indicator light? And then she's like, oh, there's an engine. Oh, cool. The engine's overheating. All right, well, that's no big deal. I can go for a little while for the engine overheating. There's nowhere to pull over a 38-foot RV, though, so you have to go for a little while more. And then about 2 minutes later, all of a sudden, a second light comes up. I'm like, what's that, Abby? She shines a little flashlight on. Oh, it's got a little gear. Oh, good. That's a transmission. That's overheating. Nice. Okay, engine's overheating. Transmission's overheating. I got no dash. All right, so then that's fine. We can deal with this just as soon as I find a place to stop. And then a little and then what in the world is that? And then I'm like, Abby, shine a flashlight. She goes, oh, well, it's this little oil stick. And I'm like, what does it say? It says 0. Oh, good. No oil pressure. All right, not big deal. I still got brakes. The little night light comes on. And Abby, shine the flashlight. What is that? Oh, no air pressure. You have no air brakes. Oh, good. This is a bus, by the way. I've got no air brakes, no oil pressure. My engine's overheated. My transmission's overheating, and I got no dash. Okay, no problem. I can still see. 2 minutes later, I'm like, is the road getting really dim? Is the road getting really dim? What's going on? And Abby's like, I don't know. I can't see very well. I'm like, what in the world? I got no headlights. I'm between Boone and Blowing Rock in the Appalachian Mountains at night. Nothing, I can't see, and everything's dying. Isn't this a great start to the whole God's planning for us to take a sabbatical? I'm like, I'm not doing this. So Eva starts crying, and I was like, what's wrong, honey? And she goes, I'm afraid we're all going to die. I kid you not, that was what she said, my 5-year-old. I'm afraid we're all going to die, and I thought, that's not unreasonable. I couldn't tell her that. Of course, she's not here. That's good. She's in Grace Kids. That's good. And I thought, it's not such an unreasonable fear. That's pretty realistic. And but I thought, honey, it's okay. God's going to care for us. Yeah, he's going to protect us. I'm like, oh, God, help. We found a place we pulled off. God provided at the very beginning. Called the guy and said, hey, just want to let you know what happened. By the way, I know we've already paid for it. I know it's already mine. I know we already have the title. By the way, I want to let you know what happened. He came out the next morning. Long story short, he took the RV back. refunded the money to us. We were able to give the RV back. That was just God's provision at the very outset. But we got home that next night. By the way, we ended up staying overnight in Blowing Rock in the end of March, I think. And I didn't know how cold it gets in Blowing Rock at the end of March when you're staying in an RV without heat and not any electricity and everything's failed. It gets real cold in the 30s. So God provided for us. We didn't have anything with us because we weren't planning to stay overnight like that. And he came out the next morning and took the RV back. But when we got home that night, the very first thing that Julie and I agreed was, you know what, we're never going to do this. We are not buying an RV. No way. We're not taking a sabbatical either because I don't even know if I want to do this. I just can't handle it. There's no way we can afford to take 8 weeks off. There's no way we can do this trip. There's no way this is going to happen. And so we made a pact that night, Tuesday night, you know what, no way. What we didn't know is that God was actually moving on somebody's heart. Julie had gone and looked at an RV like a month earlier. We weren't interested. There's this couple that was doing some kind of ministry, and they were living in their RV. They were asking too much for it. We weren't interested, and that was it. Never in contact with it again. But God actually, Julie had just met the husband, but God actually spoke to that husband's wife that night. We don't know these people. They're not part of a church that we know. They're not part of the group of churches. There's no relationships here. They didn't know our story. And yet God spoke to that lady that night, and she was way home from a prayer meeting. And he said, would you consider giving your RV away instead of selling it? She's like, I guess, Lord. And she's telling a story. And then she was like, well, and God said, hey, I want you to give it away. She's like, oh, okay, well, who to? And so she's having this internal dialogue. And so she's feeling like God's speaking to her, and God says, there was a lady who your husband met that had 6 kids. I want you to give it to her. And so she's like, oh, that's weird. And so she went home, told her husband. Her husband started smirking. He's like, yeah, I already heard from God. He told me that 3 days ago. I was just waiting for him to tell you. And so the next day when I'm relaying to Aaron in our staff meeting, that next morning I'm relaying to Aaron, hey, by the way, RV broke down. Here's what happened. It was crazy. And I was just about to say, there's no way we're doing this RV thing, and I don't really want to go on sabbatical. And yet Julie called and interrupted the meeting. He was like, hey, by the way, something really weird. This couple wants to give us their RV for free. I'm like, really? No joke? Like, what's the catch? There's no catches. God provided. That's how things started. And kind of the rest is history. He provided and continued to provide. He provided the funds to go from people in the church that gave generously, that cared for us. He provided exactly what we needed. I'm grateful for how overwhelmingly generous you as a church have been to us, and kind you've been to us, and supportive. And it's just nuts. Like, who supports somebody and saying, you know what, yeah, why don't you go away and have time with God, and we're going to help you do that. It's blown us away. It's made us feel even more loved and cared for than you can know. And he's continued to provide in so many different ways. Along the trip, our RV, by the time we got to about Oklahoma, and I didn't know Oklahoma had hills until I was driving an RV up these mile-long hills in Oklahoma that were, only this slow grade, but apparently it was tough on an RV, and our RV started overheating. And I'm like, oh gosh. And so it kept overheating. Temperatures in the red. We didn't find any repair shops within a couple hundred miles. Nobody would do the work. And then finally we came into this little podunk town in Alamosa, Colorado. And I mean podunk town in Alamosa, Colorado. If you're from there, I am sorry. There's just nothing there. And it's in the middle of this flat area. But we couldn't find anybody to do the work. And so Julie just happened to find this place. And it was 4 o'clock. They were just about to close. He's like, I might take a look at it. I don't know. And we're like, oh, no, because everybody else wanted hundreds of dollars to even take a look at it. We pull into this place, and I see a scripture verse at the bottom of their sign. It says, in Romans 1:16, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. It's the power of God for salvation of everyone who believes. And I thought, okay. And the guy not only he said, we're backed up 2 months. I'm so sorry. We have 2 months of back work that we're not even able to do, and I don't think we'll be able to do this. And then so the owner's like, you know what, I'll do it myself. And so within a couple hours, he was able to fix up what the problem was, replace some parts, charge us less than what we were able to get it diagnosed for. And then all along the way, so many different things like that. We had different little teeny breakdowns along the way, and God provided a parts place just when we needed it in the middle of nowhere. And they even let us try the parts out first to make sure they fit before we bought them. And things like a stranger giving us, I know it sounds kind of crazy, but, we stopped at a little fruit stand, brought some fruit, and she was like, hey, why don't you just take this box of cucumbers? So there's little ways, just so many different ways that God provided when the RV, we had this slide in the RV, which is how we were able to fold a bed out and sleep and stuff for the kids. And so Nobody would repair it. We were in Moab, Utah, and that is one barren place, by the way. And so we were in Moab, Utah, and nobody could take us. Nobody would look at it. And they were like, I know this guy. Why don't you call him? So we called this guy. And he's like, hey, and he said, I'm sorry, I can't help you. I'm on vacation in California. But why don't you tell me your problem? So we told him the problem, and he diagnosed on the phone, and we were able to fix it for free. And so just so many different things like that. The fresh water pump went out. We couldn't find a place to fix it or get the parts. Julie found a place. They only just had the part, but they said, you know what, actually, it's not your water pump. Here's the thing that's wrong. It'll cost you $12. And then, the car's power steering went out right before we were getting ready to drive down the hill from Sequoia National Park. And if you've ever heard of or been to Sequoia, it's this really windy mountain roads, very narrow with like a 5,000-foot drop-off. And I'm not kidding, 5,000-foot drop-off in some places. And so we're just getting ready for Julie to drive down that road so that it'd make it easier to drive the RV down. And then we found out, boy, the power steering had gone out. And that's a good time to find out, by the way, on this side of driving down. And we went, one night we had to, this is going to sound nuts, our reservation got messed up at one place, and so we camped out at Walmart in the middle of the night once, and God protected us. And there's Isaiah 41:10. It says, fear not, I am with you, be not dismayed. I'm your God, I will strengthen you, I will help you, I will uphold you by my righteous right hand. And time after time, God confirmed he was helping us. He upheld us all along the way. Our bikes, when we went to Canada, our bikes got stolen from the back of our car. I came out that morning, it was like 7 in the morning. It was like, what in the world? The bikes are stolen. So I told the person whose house we're staying at, I was like, hey, just want to let you know. And they were like, you need to call the cops. I'm like, I don't want to call the cops because we're never going to get bikes. Nobody gets bikes back. And so I called the police, and I was like, hey, I'm just calling to report some stolen bikes. And she chuckled. And I was like, I know that nobody gets them back. She's like, nah. And I said, I know that it's like, it's a good idea to report a theft because you need to know about those things. She's like, yeah, thanks for reporting it. It's pretty unlikely. I don't think you'll get them back. Hang on. I'm like, what? And then she put me on hold. I'm like, that was abrupt. I thought Canadians were polite. And, which they are, by the way. And so, and she's like, hang on. And then she comes back. She goes, are your bikes like black and green? I'm like, yeah. Are they this brand? Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, this is weird. I've never had this happen before. But when you called, like the same time you're calling, the officer called and he said he had found your bikes 4 blocks away and he was reporting found. This never happens. I'm like, well, that's really cool. And he put them on the front of his police cruiser, strapped to the push bumper, and brought them over. And, just so many crazy things, time after time, God caring for us. Small things, like Abby had lost her phone in a porta potty at Stanley Park. And by the way, Stanley Park is bigger than Central Park. So, and it's Vancouver's a big city, in case as an American you don't know, but it's a pretty big city, several million people, and this is a park that's bigger than Central Park. So this is not like a small thing. So she left there. Somehow it got returned to another place, and we were able to come back and find it. And Julie, later on in the same day, several hours later, did the same thing at a different place in the park. And we went back a few hours later, and it had been turned in. I mean, that just doesn't happen. Little things like that, time after time. I don't know where to. There's so many small stories, like, and a lot of them had to do with porta potties. But so 2 phones in toilets left. There was Sarah lost a walkie-talkie when we were in Colorado in a porta potty, and then it got returned. At the end of the day, it got back to us. I mean, it's not like we had our names on any of these things, and just randomly. Oh, the first night stay, we woke up, came out, and really excited to get going, and we had 2 flat tires in the RV. What a great start! And a dead battery in the car. We're pulling great. And by the way, I forgot to bring jumper cables, and we're in a national park. That's great. And just turned out that the guy who was hosting just happened to be there and have jumper cables, and we just happened to have 2 cans of Fix-A-Flat, and 9,000 miles later, the tires have not gone flat still. Eva was attacked by a big shepherd, some kind of big rescue shepherd, which I'm not sure what it's rescuing from, but it bit her, and it lunged at her, but God protected her, and this huge, this was like a 100-and-some-pound dog, This huge dog, my little girl, and she walked away with only puncture wounds in her backside, which was actually good. There's God's protection in that. And she was able to sleep that night. And the next day, this was nuts. She woke up the next day, I was like, how you feeling? And she was like, no, I'm fine. Okay, you've got puncture wounds in a place that's not comfortable to sit, and we're going to sit all day, and she was feeling okay, and within a couple days it healed. A pretty serious puncture dog bite, and we were frustrated another time, at least I was frustrated another time, when we couldn't get tickets. It's one of the couples, if you plan out a big trip like this, you only have a few different areas you can splurge on, so we're going to splurge. We're going to take the kids to go down in this cave in South Dakota. We're going to take this elevator down, I don't know how many stories down this cave, and it's the only way to get down, and I was really disappointed because it didn't work out, and we couldn't go down, and one cave was closed, and one cave we wanted to go down in. They just booked out a second beforehand. And so I was a little frustrated. And then we found out the next day that, that cave's elevator broke that day. And so whoever was on that elevator, they didn't get out for a while. That would not have been a good day. And so we avoided getting stuck in an elevator in a cave. And one night it was late. I had been frustrated that day because a bunch of things didn't work out the way I wanted to. And so we were just barely going to get to a place before it closed, and then we're going to stay. And so I missed the turn. I missed a turn. No big deal. I'll take the next turn. Well, they're doing road construction. So I couldn't take a turn for 20 miles. And so it's 40 minutes later. I had to turn around, do a detour. Finally, I find a gas station to turn around, and I got out. I pumped gas, and then I go to get back in. I'm like, what's that smell? And one of the kids was like, it smells like rotten broccoli. And that's not a surprise. 8 people in an RV, right? There's a lot of smells. Rotten, a lot of stuff, I'll say. And everything from bad breath to everything else. And so, Julie and the kids were like, it's probably just a bathroom. And so it's not surprising, close quarters. But I thought, that doesn't smell right. It's not just rotten. How would we be rotten? We didn't even have broccoli. And then I realized, something's not right. And then I realized, it's gas. And so I had the kids all get out of the RV real quick and found that somehow one of the burners on the stove in the RV had gotten turned on at some point in our drive and had been filling the RV up with gas. And if I hadn't missed the turn and gotten out and stopped at the gas station, I wouldn't have had fresh air come back in. I wouldn't have smelled that. We all probably would have kept going and just fallen asleep. And so, just so many ways God provided for us, protected us, and cared for us. As we went, it just made me more aware in so many small ways. And there were hundreds of small ways that He provided, that He provides and cares for all of us like that all the time. He provides and cares for you like that all the time. So many things you might think is coincidence in your life. So many things that you're thinking, oh no, these bad things happened. That actually might be God keeping you from something else. Or, oh no, this is inconvenient for me. Yeah, that's probably God caring for you, providing for you, protecting you, even when you don't see it. What did you, maybe what a takeaway for you is, God's providing and care for us. How has He provided and cared for you? What are some ways? Are you attuned to them? Being away helped us be more attuned to seeing God's provision and care in so many small ways all throughout the day. Are you attuned to those things? How's God provided for you? How's He protected you? How has He cared for you? Are you attuned to all the subtle, small ways that He's cared for you? Don't chalk them up to coincidence. You may not see it right away. And I'm not talking about getting rich, but provision of what you need. It says He'll supply all your needs according to His riches and glory in Christ Jesus. But it's not everything you want, but it's everything you need. You might not always see it right away. It may not come when you want it, but it'll come just when you need it. Not a second earlier sometimes. May take His provision for granted, but I want you to be attuned. Where's God providing for you? Where's He caring for you? It's meant, His provision, His care is meant for you to look up and see His faithfulness. That's how it helped us. We've seen His faithfulness. We've seen His care. We've seen His faithfulness in so many small ways. Our response then is to do what Peter talks about. 1 Peter 5:6 says, humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time He might exalt you, casting your anxieties on Him. Why? Because He cares for you. Because He cares for you. Now, I have something to confess. I was not a model of what to do when all these things went wrong. And there were like 100 other things, by the way. When things went wrong, when I didn't get what I wanted, when I wasn't in control, when I didn't get what I expected, I wasn't the guy I wanted to be. I didn't always respond well at the time. But it was good. And what was God faithful in? He was faithful to reveal my need. God is faithful to reveal our need for Him. That's what God showed us even more. I learned even more. God is faithful to reveal our need for Him. And sometimes He does that through frustrating our plans and through difficulties and through challenges and through our own sin. And I saw a lot of my own sin. People were like, hey, how'd you guys all get along? I'm like, everybody else was fine. It was just Dad. And they laughed. I'm like, no, really. No, really. They were all okay. It was just me. And I think that was really true. When Paul talked about himself being the worst of sinners, I'm like, I think that was my experience. I'm thinking I was the worst sinner on my sabbatical, by far. Was it a holy thing for you? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. It wholly showed me my need for God. It was holy. And it wholly showed me my sinfulness and my need for holiness. And that was very, very good. A major part of being a Christian is sanctification. And that God makes us more like Him. He rescued us and He redeemed us. And that's wonderful to celebrate, but He did it for a purpose that was to conform us to the image of His Son. We often like quoting. I like to quote Romans 8, right? You ever like to quote Romans 8, 28 and 29? I like to quote that all the time, right? And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good. Yeah, all right. For those who called according to His purpose, here's the good of the things, what He's talking about. For those He foreknew, He predestined. What's the good? To be conformed to the image of His Son, in order that He might be the firstborn among many brothers. What is God's goodness? That He is working all things, through all things. The goodness He's working is to conform us to the image of His Son. But you know what? When we're not like Jesus, and He makes us more like Jesus, you know how He does that? By revealing where we're not like Jesus. By revealing how sinful I am. And I gotta be honest, I don't like conforming sometimes. Because it means getting rid of things in me that don't conform to His image. Getting rid of the things that aren't Christ-like. It's necessary that it be more Christ-like. And sometimes that is painful. So my sabbatical was great. And it was painful. So it sounds funny. You're like, oh no, this was good. This is really, really good. God often has to expose the true ugliness of our sin to us for us to see it so we can repent of it, hate it, and start putting it to death. And it's wonderful. On this side, it's wonderful. These things aren't done. I'm not completely sanctified. Until I get to be with heaven, which one day will occur, I'll be working on these things, but these are good things. Sometimes it's easier to see somebody else's sin, and we get used to seeing our own sin and blind to it or comfortable to it. And it's those sweet moments, bittersweet moments that God says, you know what, you got to see this. It's not so attractive. You need some work here. And you know what? This is good because I want to make you like Jesus. And this is an area that you don't even know you're not like Jesus. So in order to be conformed to His image, it means needing to see just how sinful we are. I was thinking about, after we came back, this sounds silly, but after we came back, we had a coffee maker. It sat for 2 months, at our home. And so I went to make coffee, and it was terrible. And what's wrong with this? And I opened up the coffee maker. Something doesn't smell right. So I started cleaning it, soaked in this cleaning solution, and got shocked by what came out of the coffee maker. And stuff started flaking off. And I didn't even know that pot was dirty. But it's a different color. It's not bronze. It's actually silver. And the stuff started flaking off in different places and didn't even know it was there, and mold had gotten inside, and and I saw it got loose from soaking it, and I was able to scrub it out. But if it didn't taste bad, it wouldn't have done anything, and if I didn't start to respond and clean it, then all that stuff wouldn't have gotten loose and we couldn't have taken care of it. And it's kind of like that for us in our lives, that if you don't realize that, hey, your behavior tastes bad, your behavior stinks. If you don't realize that, if God doesn't show that to you, you're going to walk around with an area that is keeping you from being more like Jesus. And so God is gracious. It doesn't feel that way at the time, by the way. It feels like everybody else is, no, it's not my sin, it's everybody else's the problem. Well, if you're getting angry when somebody else does something, that's your issue. When things don't go your way and you're not in control and you get angry in response, the problem is not the situation, the problem is in your heart, and it's just getting revealed. I love the old illustration David Powlison used to give, and he would say, that if you take a sponge, you soak it in some dirty water, you pick it up, you might not see the dirt, but you squeeze it, dirt comes out. Why does dirt come out when you squeeze it? Well, you might say, it's the circumstances that are squeezing that it makes that dirt come out. Well, no, they're just revealing what the junk that was in there. And so God has graciously done that to some degree in some different areas with anger and expectations and control and things in my life. I'm like, that's good. It's really good. And, when I didn't get my way, my sin was exposed. I get what I wanted. Things broke down. Family members frustrated me. My family confronted me. It wasn't easy. It was painful. I didn't like it, but it was good. And it's humbling, right? It's humbling. You say, I got some stuff I got to deal with. It made me not like my sin, though. It makes me want to get rid of it. And isn't that good? What's God wanting to show you? Where have you become complacent? Where have you become okay with areas in your life that don't smell so good, that stink a little, that aren't the way they should be? I learned afresh that my biggest problems it's not others, it's not circumstances, it's remaining sin in my own heart. That's my biggest problem. My own need for sanctification. Church, our own need for sanctification is great. Your biggest problem is not other people inconveniencing you. It's not circumstances. It's not you not being in control. It's not things not going your way. It's not you not having what you want. It's remaining sin. When we're frustrated and challenged, it reveals something. It reveals what we're wanting. And often what we want is not in conformity to what God wants. Often our desires don't conform to the desires of Jesus. So this means to be conformed to the image of Jesus means to be conformed to what he wants, what he desires. And often our desires are not what he desires. And those things get exposed. That's God at work. That's really good. Don't despise that if God's at work and you're like, I'm just seeing all this sin in my life. You know what? That's God at work. What a grace it is when God lovingly corrects us. My first response, though, I think it's like most of us. What's your first response, by the way, when you are just seeing so much of an area in your life that you're like, I'm just a mess? Are you like, yay? Anybody here like, yay? I don't think so. My first response is, you know what? I'm a bonehead. I'm an idiot. I start having this internal dialogue. I get discouraged and despondent, think I'm never going to change. But you know what? Hebrews 12 speaks a better word in the midst of experiencing the revealing of our sin. Hebrews 12 says, have you forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons and daughters, by the way? My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord. Don't be weary when reproved by him. For the Lord disciplines the one he loves and chastises every son. Whom what? Whom he receives. It's a sign. When God is bringing correction to me, when God's bringing correction to you, it's a sign of the fact that God is actually not rejecting you. He receives you. That's nuts, right? We can feel like rejection by God when he reveals sin in our lives as believers. We can feel like God's rejecting us. No, that's God saying, you know what? I want you to know that I'm receiving you. I correct those I receive. That's crazy. That's not how we are. When my sin is revealed, I feel guilty and convicted. It's meant for me to see that God loves me. It goes on in verses 7 to 9. It says, it's for discipline you have to endure. God is treating you as sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? If you're left without discipline, in which we've all participated, then you're illegitimate children, not sons. Besides this, we've had earthly fathers who discipline us, and we respected them. Shall we not much more be subject to the Father of spirits and live? It's a sign that we're his child. If God has disciplined you, if he is disciplining you, if he's revealing sin, if he's correcting you, if it is painful, it's a sign that he receives you, that he adopted you as a son, that he has placed his spirit in you, and that he wants to give you life. It's meant for you to see that you're not an orphan. You're a child. I love in verse 11 of Hebrews 12, it says, for the moment, all discipline seems painful. That's true. I was in a lot of pain in that regard, rather than pleasant. But later yields the peace. Here's the thing. Here's what discipline does. It yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness. The peaceful fruit of knowing that we have His righteousness that's being perfected and wrought in us to those who've been trained by it. Don't reject. Don't become despondent. Don't despair. Don't become discouraged. Don't wallow in discouragement and think that's a humble response when you experience discipline. That's a normal response if our eyes remain on ourselves. What I needed to do, what all of us need to do, is say, wait a minute, I'm despondent and despairing because I'm looking at myself and I'm looking to myself to fix myself and realizing I can't, and so I'm stuck in despair. And instead God says, no, I want you to see that I receive you, that I love you, that I've adopted you, and that I'm at work in you, and I want you to have peaceful fruit of righteousness. He wants us to share in His holiness. He wants us to be more like Him. Here's in verse 12, it says how we can respond. How do we respond? How should I, and how has God been showing me how to respond as I've seen more and more of my sin? It's that, therefore, lift your drooping hands. Why? Oh, because He loves us. Because we're His children. Because He receives us. That, in the midst of discipline, is how we can lift drooping hands. That's how we're meant to respond when He reveals sin. Not with, oh, I'm such an awful person. Well, yes, but you know what? He receives you. He's working in you. He's adopted you. There's hope. Not because of you, but because of Him. Lift your drooping hands. Strengthen your weak knees. Make straight paths for your feet so that what's lame might not be put out of joint, but rather healed. The discipline's meant to heal us, to encourage us, to strengthen us, show us the right way to go. I learned that, and I also learned to see my inability. God shows us, He's faithful to show us our inability. I can't beat my sin with my own self-effort. You can't beat your sin with your own self-effort, and you were never meant to. You know, in Galatians, Paul talks to the Galatians and he corrects them. He says, you didn't begin this on your own. Do you think you're going to complete it? Don't think, Christian, that you're able to complete your sanctification on your own. Like, God, I got this now. But you know what? We can be lulled. I've been lulled into that sense that, you know what? God, thanks for the conviction. Now I just got to get to work. And that's true, but we don't actually change ourselves. God uses those efforts. We participate with Him, but God's the one who actually brings change. He wanted me to see, once again, I'm wholly dependent on God's grace, desperate for Him to change me, enable me. You are too. Where do you see your inability? That inability is meant for you to look to Him for His ability and to look up in hope that He receives you. He's adopted you. You're His child. He's working, and He will train you with it. I learned something else too. I learned that I need God personally more than ever. I know it sounds kind of silly for a pastor to say, right? But you know, sometimes we can just fail to see just how desperate we are for God. And I think all of us need to live there. Desperate each day. You struggle with getting up in the morning and saying, you know, I don't feel like getting up and having a quiet. You're never going to feel like it, by the way. But when you begin to see, I'm desperate. I need God. You know what happens? He is faithful to reveal Himself. And when we see our weakness, it's really good. Paul says in 2 Corinthians 12, he says, but He said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in what? It doesn't say in our ability. I would like to rephrase that, Paul. I'd like to say, for God's power is seen in my ability. And that would be heretical. But that's how I think sometimes, right? You ever think that way? And we are like, oh gosh, I'm so weak. Yeah. That's so we don't trust in our ability, so we trust in His ability. My power, His power is made perfect in my weakness. So Paul says, therefore I boast all the more gladly of what? Of my weakness. Why? So the power of Christ may rest upon me. Let me ask you this. If you were deluded into thinking that your hope lied with your ability and your power, do you think that's any real hope at all? Say that again. If your hope lies in your ability, is there really any hope for you at all? So it's good that we see our weakness. Why? So we can see where our true hope is, where there's true power. If we could redeem ourselves, we wouldn't need the power of the Redeemer. If we could rescue ourselves, we wouldn't need His power to rescue us. You alone can rescue. You alone can save. Why do we boast in our weakness? Oh, so His power can rest on me. Because you know what happens when we're trusting our ability? We're not looking to His power. So His power is not resting on us in that sense. You understand what I mean? We're not appropriating His power if we're self-reliant, self-sufficient, looking to our ability and aware of how strong, how good we are, and that we're going to do this. You know who you're not looking to? God in that moment. That's the worst thing ever. So God brought me to a place of weakness so I could see that, let me look to where I can really get power, so the power of Christ may rest on me. And that's good. Where are you looking? What ability are you trusting in? Are you disdaining weakness? Don't. Look to the only place that has power to change you, Jesus and His power. Another thing I learned real quick, we're just going to finish up. By the way, I'm going to take the same amount of time, but I'm almost done. It's okay. Related to that, His love and His faithfulness are not related to my ability. I didn't feel like it, but every time after a challenge or a problem or my own sin, we were able to look back and see God's faithfulness, and it had nothing to do with something I fixed or did. I saw afresh. I couldn't stop sinning. Oh my gosh, I'm such a bonehead. I'm just getting angry all the time. What's the problem? Something's wrong with me. Yeah, I need Jesus. And, it began to drive me to seek God anymore, my desperate need for Him daily. Let your weakness, let your sin, let your inability point you, teach you to see that His faithfulness is not related to your ability. It never was to begin with. What ability does a dead person have to save themselves? It says we were dead in our sins. We were enemies of God. A dead man can't respond, and yet God enabled us and made us able to respond. That is a wonderful lesson to learn and to live in, is that it's not related to our ability, and even as a believer, it's still not related to your ability. I love the story of David. It's been on my mind the last few weeks, the story of David, the man after God's own heart. And you're like, David's such a great guy. And then he goes and commits adultery with Bathsheba and kills her husband. He failed in many ways as a parent. A lot of ways. He made a lot of mistakes. He was a man of blood. But you know what? At the end of his life, just before he died, in 2 Samuel 22, here's what David declares in 2 Samuel 22:51. He says, "Great salvation He brings to His king and shows steadfast love to His anointed, to David and his offspring forever." How could David say that? Because it didn't depend on God, on David. It depended on God. God brought the salvation. God showed steadfast love. It wasn't because David was so steadfast. It's not because you're so steadfast. It's not because you're able. It's not because I'm able. He brings salvation. He shows steadfast love. It says, and to His offspring forever. You know what? We are His offspring through Christ Jesus. Another thing I learned from living in a really nice rectangular box. And I don't think I ever showed you a picture of that. I don't know if you can go back to that or not, if it's possible even. I don't know if it's possible. I don't know. We have a new program. So this is the rectangular box, and then the next one over to, I have another picture. That's the box we lived in. It was a really big box. It was great. We loved it. It was awesome provision. And go to, I think we have another one of us. That's me driving. And then next one, that's the table. And then another one. Okay, this is the sleeping arrangements for all the kids. We were packed in there. The kids were packed in there. Julie and I had our own bed, so we were cool. But they were packed in. Everybody shared a bed except for the person who actually got the air mattress on the floor. That was really cool. Because you didn't have to share a bed. But the problem is it was actually really cool. And I mean cold. And so what we didn't know is being away in all these high altitude places, it got down to like the 30s at night. And so the person on the air mattress actually was cold. We had to cut the heat on. But anyway, so something I learned living together in that 300 square feet for 2 months, it's that God is faithful, but He will work in us to grow us in contentment. He wants us to be content in Him. He's faithful to be at work in us to grow contentment, and sometimes He does that by confining us to be content with less. And it's one of the things He did with us. I didn't expect to grow in contentment. I wasn't looking like, I'm gonna go away and grow in contentment. But you know what? When you all have one toe to close for a few months, you realize that, hey, we don't need a ton. And we had a couple pairs of shoes each. We don't need a lot. And the diversity of our meals was limited. Some things we just didn't think of. Okay, we can only have like this much clothes per person. That's it. We can have a couple pair of shoes. We can have, like our diversity of meals are not going to be, we're going to have the same stuff a lot, because you can only make so many things in an Instant Pot, And even then you can't even cook while you're driving, which means like a lot of sandwiches. I wasn't a big sandwich fan to begin with, but I'm just content now for food. And, 1 Timothy 6:6 says, now there's great gain in godliness and contentment, for we brought nothing into the world, we cannot take anything out of the world, but if we have food and clothing, with these we'll be content. And I know it sounds silly, but God showed us even more, hey, we just need something to eat, and we need some clothes, not a ton of clothes, and we need, 8 of us live in a 300 square foot box. It actually helped us learn to let go of attachment to things, and after very little water pressure in an RV, when the kids are opting, like, hey, Dad, can I pay $2 for that 6-minute shower, at the stall that's not so clean? You know that the water pressure is bad and it's not so great. They're like, hey, I gotta go there and it's lukewarm water for 6 minutes, and then you're like, oh no, it ran out. What do you do now? We went to sites that didn't have sewer hookups, and I didn't realize how important sewage is. I learned a lot. I won't go into detail there. I didn't know that, things like bathrooms that I took for granted. 8 of us sharing one bathroom. I didn't realize that was an issue until we did. And then I realized, hey, you know what, we can do this. And we didn't have electric hookups sometimes. I realized I took electricity for granted. Things like running water, heat, air conditioning, electricity, sewer. I realized those aren't givens. And I've always treated that in my life like a given. And I realized, you know what, no. We're just in the last century, really, where we're given these things, and yet we can be so discontent and realize, man, there's so many ways God's so generous to us. What do you have in your life that you can be grateful for? What do you have in your life you can be grateful for? Do you have a place to sleep? You have food? You have clothing to cover you? I'm not saying you have like all that you want, all name brands. You have clothing, you have food? Paul says, with that we'll be content. And you know why? Because he says there's great gain in godliness with contentment. And I also learned, something else too, is that, I disconnected from, one of the things that we talked about was me disconnecting from social media, from contact with people, from my phone, from posting to Facebook and that kind of stuff, and from news. And so I stopped doing those things for 7.5 of the 8 weeks. I took a few days before I came back to kind of be reacclimated in the news, but almost all the 8 weeks, I was completely off of all news, all Facebook, all that kind of stuff. I posted one thing because I just wanted to rejoice in what God did and bring those stolen bikes back, but that was it. I think entertainment-wise, we watched maybe 3 movies together in 8 weeks. We didn't watch TV, nothing else. I didn't miss it. And then I realized, how much time is wasted and I fill with all those things that they don't bring satisfaction, and yet we sometimes look to social media or news, entertainment, to give us fulfillment or give us a sense of belonging, a sense of satisfaction, to entertain, to distract. Well, that's kind of noise. I think God wants us to learn contentment. I'm not saying that we should completely unplug from society, but you know what? Maybe try saying, hey, what happened? What am I attached to? Whatever it is that I'm attached to, what would happen if I detached from it for a little while? What do I find that I just kind of gravitate to when I've got time on my hands? That I'm kind of just eating like cotton candy, What do I gravitate, what do I just kind of default to? Do I default to social media, entertainment? Do I default to sports or whatever else it is, or music? What do I default to, look for comfort or an escape or entertainment? And you know what? Try fasting from that thing. Try fasting to see how attached you are to it, and then ask God to cultivate contentment in you instead. And I think it's going to do something good. You're going to see that you don't need those things as much. What you need is God. There's so many other things. I don't have time to go into all those things. Just God's care consistently throughout all those things, His care through the church. Scripture kept coming to mind in Luke 12:6 says, "Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 pennies? Not one of them is forgotten before God. Why, even the hairs of your head are numbered. Fear not, you're more valuable than many sparrows." God showed me that He loves me, He values me more than the sparrows, because He values His Son, and I am in Him. The last thing I want to share with you is I learned to see God's faithfulness through you, through His church. God shows His faithfulness through His church. Don't discount people in the church caring for you and say that, you know what, I feel like I'm distant from God. Really? Is He speaking to you through so many people trying to care for you and love you and reach out to you in the church? That's God's faithfulness to you. God shows His faithfulness through arms, through hands, through feet, through legs of other people in the church. I feel distant from God. Really? Well, plug into the church and you'll see God's faithfulness. I was overwhelmed by your care, by your affection, by your love, your generosity. And we've grown in our affection and gratitude for even more. He's shown His faithfulness to this church family as well. And he reminded us of how much we need fellowship. And what a joy it was to be back last week, just to be a part of the church and to worship and be in fellowship. And I just realized even more how much I need fellowship personally. It's also grateful to see that the church doesn't depend on me, that we're still here. You're still here 8 weeks later. And God brought 8 different pastors to preach each week. And I heard so many good testimonies this week about how each one brought a different word that was an encouragement to people. God provides the different churches that we're partnering with, that we're joined together in this network of churches that we're part of. So many of those guys came here and they preached, and it was really neat to see God's faithfulness in that. I feel awkward today talking about what God showed me in my sabbatical, but I think God intends for all of us to benefit. Church, look back on all the ways God's cared for you. How has God provided for you in the past, this year, this month, this week? How have challenges in the past currently revealed His faithfulness to you in the midst of difficulties? How has your inability, your weakness reveal Him? How has God revealed your sin, your need for Him this week? God wants us to draw closer to Him so we can experience His grace all the more, and often that comes through seeing those things. Have you experienced the pain of correction? See the loving Father who's conforming us to Him, sharing us His holiness with us, and growing His righteousness in us. God's been faithful to all of us, church. Sometimes it takes work for us to see, but as we see God's faithfulness, it's meant to give us hope. Looking back, the last thing we need to do is to see that God's faithfulness is meant to give us hope for His faithfulness in the future. God's faithfulness in the past. You might be struggling with something right now. You might be struggling with difficulties and challenges in your life, loss. You might be struggling with inability right now. You might be struggling with weakness. You might be struggling in different areas of your life. But God's faithfulness to you in the past. And by the way, you've got to do some work to remind yourself of it and to see it and to say, wait a minute, God, I see all the ways in the past you've been faithful. Lord, let that give me fresh hope for your faithfulness in the future, because God has more for you in store. You don't have to stay where you've been. You're not defined by your past. You're not defined by your failure. You can make a fresh start. Why? Because of His faithfulness, not yours. His mercies are new every morning. I'm going to ask the band to come up. We'll close with one song. It's Great is Thy Faithfulness, with some different lyrics. Before we sing that song, though, I want to share with you a song by Sarah Groves, is kind of setting us up for that song. It's morning by morning, I wake up to find the power and comfort of God's hand in mine. Season by season, I watch Him amazed in all of the mystery of His perfect ways. All I have need of, His hand will provide. He's always been faithful to me. I can't remember a trial or a pain He didn't recycle to bring me gain. I can't remember one single regret in serving God only and trusting His hand. All I have need of, His hand will provide. He's always been faithful to me. This is my anthem. This is my song, the theme of the stories I've heard for so long. God has been faithful. He will be again. His loving compassion, it knows no end. All I have need of, his hand will provide. He's always been faithful to me. So let's stand and let's sing, "Great is thy faithfulness," together. Amen.